Um, Good morning. I'm Marty Downs. Welcome to the community call for the LTER network. LTER network addresses ecological questions that can't be resolved with short-term observations or experiments. Research at LTER sites advances understanding of the long-term dynamics of populations, communities, and ecosystems through observation, experiments, and modeling. The LTER network now includes 27 sites and the LTER network office, which coordinates sites and provides centralized representation of the LTER network to the scientific community and the public. These monthly community calls are an opportunity to learn from and about your colleagues, both inside and outside the LTER network. We'll talk about emerging initiatives, spin-off projects, related organizations, or deep dives into LTER science, education, and engagement. If you've got ideas for future call topics, please give us a shout at the network office. That's either myself, Downs at ncs.ucsb.edu, or Gabe De La Rosa, who's De La Rosa at ncs.ucsb.edu. The LTER network has a code of conduct, which we expect everyone to adhere to in these meetings. It's pretty straightforward. Basically, just treat your colleagues respectfully. And if you encounter an issue with that, please contact us at the network office or any member of the LTER executive board. Today, we're hosting the hurricane ecosystem research. Oh God, help me out, Chris.
It's the Hurricane Ecosystem Response Synthesis.
Response and Synthesis Research Coordination Network, which is an NSF-funded project dedicated to connecting natural scientists, economists, sociologists, statisticians, modelers, and resource managers to develop a global understanding for what governs ecosystem responses to tropical hurricanes. Chris Patrick is speaking today. He's, in addition to being the PI on the HERS network, he runs the Coastal and Estuarine Ecology Lab at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science and manages the Chesapeake Bay Submerged Aquatic Vegetation Mapping Program. Chris earned his PhD at the University of Notre Dame, served as American Association for the Advancement of Science and Technology Fellow with the EPA Office of Water, and at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center as a research associate before landing at VIMS. And there you go, Chris.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to share screen and let's see, bring up my talk. All right, can everybody see this? Yep. And you can, all right, you can hear it. Yeah, okay. All right, good deal. All right. Well, let me start by saying, we are in the Anthropocene, and this era is really characterized by lots of extinctions. This is one of the things that people talk about quite a bit, and that the fact that we're approaching, another mass extinction, a sixth mass extinction. But all of this loss of biodiversity is really being driven by different kinds of environmental change, notably climate change. So we are rapidly warming. We've seen a lot of increases in temperatures over the past century as it is. And with that increase in temperature, there's an increased probability of extreme events. And this isn't something that's going to be happening. This is something that we're already seeing. So, if you look at the news, there's been lots of these sort of headlines of climate disasters, floods, fires, big heat domes. So lots of really catastrophic things are happening worldwide, to the point that it's actually that the shock value is wearing off. It's just, you see another headline, you're like, oh, another extreme event happened. And these events are increasing in frequency. And so it's fundamentally important to understand the effects of extreme events on ecosystems, because notably for well-studied systems, what we know about them is probably wrong now, and it's going to get more wrong as things shift. So tropical cyclones are a good example of extreme events. So we call them hurricanes or typhoons. These are these naturally occurring disturbances organizing over subtropical, tropical waters, organized circulation. So these events impact coastal regions, and that's important to people because this is where we have a huge amount of our population density and economic output. And as a result, over the past 120 years, there's been quite a bit of damage, quite a bit of human mortality, and of course, also ecosystem impacts. And the risks are increasing. So we have coastal populations increasing over the next century, and tropical cyclones are changing as well. So we're expecting to see more strong storms. We're expecting to see more rain associated with these storms, and we're expecting to see storms happening in places where they didn't used to happen, so heading towards higher latitudes. This is just the United States and all the tropical cyclone tracks since 1851 in the Atlantic, 1949 in the Pacific. So you can see there's a lot of affected area here. Here's the LTER network. And I just wanted to point out that, these places here, these 4 sites are definitely affected by hurricanes. This one here, definitely affected by tropical cyclones, these 2 to some extent as well. And then as we go into the future, more of the network is going to be at high risk of getting storms at a higher frequency. So as it is, about a quarter of the LTER sites are affected by these events. And this is probably going to transform into closer to half of the sites being affected by these events in the future. And there's already examples of impacts of hurricanes on LTER sites. So for example, this time series plot shows changes in water chemistry, nitrate concentrations following storms at Luquillo. So elevated concentrations for months to years after hurricanes. This is another one from the FCE LTER showing the impacts of storm surge on tree mortality in that site. So there's definitely effects that we're seeing. And some of the big questions are, well, how do we pull all this together? We really today lack an overarching sort of quantitative understanding of how and why ecosystems respond in different ways to tropical cyclone events. And there's a good reason for that, and that is these studies are opportunistic. So oftentimes, the people that are doing them are not disturbance ecologists per se. They just happen to be in a place that was impacted by a disturbance. So they might, have an opportunity to collect some data and tell a story. And this has generated a huge number of case studies that we call My System, My Storm stories. And if you went to any conferences, special sessions on hurricanes after the 2017 hurricane season, you probably saw this unfold where there might be 24 talks in a row that all kind of seem like they're the same talk. Somebody stands up and they talk about their system, they present what happened, and then that's the end of the talk. So lots of these sort of one-off case studies. But there's been an increasing call for global monitoring efforts, organized consortium. And there are immediate opportunities to use meta-analysis to start pulling together all these case studies and try to tackle some of these questions. Now, there is a history of synthesis within this topic area. So there have been examples of people kind of putting together synthesis on the effects of storms, individual storms. Hans Perl has done a great job of synthesizing the impacts of multiple storms on the systems that he's studying in North Carolina. But some of the shortcomings of synthesis in the early days of this are that a lot of it was descriptive rather than really quantitative. And then quantitative examples like Hans Perl's work are really more focused on individual places and successive events. And so we're still lacking a broad synthesis that's predictive, mechanistic, and widely applicable. And in terms of barriers, there's a couple. So one of them is jargon. This is a big one in all areas, I think, of disturbance ecologies, that there are so many different words that people use to describe stability and responses to disturbance. So I really like this paper by Grimm and Wissel that goes through all the different terms that they could find in the literature back in 1997. They came up with some categories, six categories of terminology that sort of sort of mean similar things. But even so, when we boil it down, we still have quite a lot of unique jargon and definitions from paper to paper, lots of different ways that people are calculating responses. And so, the big issues here, one, general framework was, or maybe I'll convince you, is or was needed. So maybe we've already kind of gotten to that point. Common language and comparable measurements are needed. So there are ways to sort of recalculate and adjust estimates, but across the field, getting everyone to do the same thing would be great. And then we need to do more studies that advance beyond these case studies to advance general understanding and general theory in this topic area. So the work that I'm talking about with the HERS-RCN really kind of dates back to the fall of 2017. So we had this really bad hurricane season with Harvey, Irma, and Maria. I was in Texas at the time. I was at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi, and Harvey kind of ran through there in August of 2017. And there's a lot of different marine and coastal scientists in that area that got hit. So UTMSI, TMUCC, and the Mission Aransas near site. And so that was an early opportunity to answer this basic question: well, what happened to the coastal systems right there? And NSF had funded a number of rapid awards to different groups asking similar questions, but in different systems. And so we pulled together the data to see what we could learn in terms of comparisons. So we had lots of different ecosystems, barrier islands, estuaries, coastal rivers, a variety of response types. And so we were able to pull all these data together and start looking at the graphs. And there's lots of interesting nuances. One of the ones that I thought was very interesting in this set of water quality graphics is you can see that in this area, Copano Bay, the salinity crashed after the storm, and then it takes 8 months before it gets up to where it was before. And we had other systems where salinity bounced back very, very quickly. So being really constrained by the geomorphology and the residence time of those systems. We put all of these data together, and one of the things that we noted pretty early was that there did appear to be some kind of cross-site relationship in, as we were calculating it then, the return time in days versus this sort of effect size magnitude. So we were seeing what we thought might be some sort of generality in system responses. So I connected with John Kalinowski with the LTER network at FIU, and also Bill McDowell at UNH, who were looking at Irma and Maria. And NSF gave us some money to organize a first workshop back in 2019 with 42 participants from across the US and beyond. And these were primarily people that were funded by NSF with rapid awards. So NSF was really keen on this idea of like, yeah, let's get all these people together that had rapids to see what we can get out of all this money that we spent. So we had a multi-day workshop where we shared data stories, tried to develop conceptual models, and try to start kind of bringing data together to look for patterns, to look for processes. And some of the things that came out of that early workshop were, well, what are the things that we need to consider when we start building a framework? And so in terms of stressors associated with storms, you can think about wind speed, the inundation of fresh water, so flooding, storm surge, so saltwater intrusion and big storm surge coming up. Where are you in relation to the eye wall? What time of year did the event happen? What was going on at the site before the event happened? And what is the speed of the storm? Is this a slow moving storm that's dumping lots of rain, or is this a really fast moving storm that just kind of cruised through at high speed? And then, for the individual sites themselves, does a place that gets hit a lot respond differently than a place that doesn't really see storms at all? So just as an example of the importance of some of these factors, this is a really kind of classic example of a storm. It was a tropical storm at the time that it got up to the Chesapeake Bay watershed. This is a Hurricane Agnes. So in June of 1972, this storm went up the East Coast and dumped an incredible amount of water in this part of the upper Chesapeake Bay watershed. So a couple of unique things. One, it was a very, very early season storm. And it was a very, very wet storm. So record amounts of rainfall up there. resulting in the highest discharge values that have ever been measured coming out of the Conowingo Dam, which is sort of like the mouth of the Chesapeake at the Susquehanna River, where it dumps out into the bay. And so one of the things that this did is this poor figure on the left is these dark patches are all SAV, submerged aquatic vegetation in 1970. On the right, this is 1975. You can see there's a lot less between the two. And then this is a time series from a particular site showing this crash right around 1972. Basically, right after this storm went through, the SAV throughout the entire Chesapeake Bay was pretty much wiped out. I mean, it did bounce back after a few years, but this was a major disturbance. And part of the issue is like so much water came through that the upper bay was buried in feet of sediment. And we had this freshwater lens that also killed marine life in the lower bay. But the other thing is that the storm happened so early that it occurred before seed production for many of the annual SAV species. And so it really did a number on their populations. And it's unique in the sense that oftentimes storms do not have big impacts on SAV. SAV tend to be very resilient to tropical storms and cyclones. And so by virtue of both the amount of water that was dumped and also the timing of the event, it was much more impactful than tropical cyclones usually are. So we put all these ideas together into a conceptual model, and we were focusing on how long it takes to recover and how big of an effect the system experiences in the first place. And so we thought that these would be governed by the strength of the storm, which has to do with all these other things that I mentioned: the wind speed, rainfall, the storm speed, the storm surge, and that systems probably have some kind of general susceptibility, like an average susceptibility to disturbance events, which is constrained by the organisms that live there, so the traits of those organisms, and then also attributes of the systems, like the morphology of the basin, hydrodynamics, geology. And so other things that can constrain this, we thought, would include the hurricane regime, whether it's a high frequency or low frequency location. And then while there might be what we're calling this average susceptibility, that can vary depending on timing. And so that would be affected by the antecedent conditions. So what's going on in the recent history of the site before the event happens. And so all of these things together then interact with storm strength to govern the response. And as you can see, it's complicated, right? Like if this is right, no wonder it's so difficult to come up with a cohesive framework for understanding or predicting how an individual system is going to respond to a storm event. And then when we layer in the human aspect, so land use, the built environment, the socio-economic systems and their susceptibility and how that might interact with the ecosystem responses, it gets even more complex. So this was published in a paper in Bioscience in 2020, and this framework has been kind of the guiding framework for the HERS-RCN network, which is the direct sort of directly following that first workshop. And so the HERS network is governed by a steering committee of the PIs shown here. So the original three plus Beth Stauffer at University of Louisiana Lafayette. And also these folks. So Annie Hensel at UF, Carrie Fritz and Peter Edwards at Pew, and David Lagomasino at East Carolina University. And so the big themes for the network are, we're trying to understand what drives the resistance and resilience of coastal systems, both natural and anthropogenic, to tropical cyclone events. And breaking this down, how do ecosystem responses scale with storm characteristics and antecedent conditions? What are the roles of the eco-evolutionary history, the life history, and biodiversity on ecosystem responses to hurricanes? And how do feedbacks between natural and socioeconomic systems affect shared resistance and resilience to tropical cyclones? And then another kind of big question is, how can we answer these questions and try to advance the science around these questions? So the first option that has been discussed in the network early on, both at the first workshop and then some subsequent meetings, was this idea that, well, we need to do new experiments. So rather than going out and just willy-nilly collecting data haphazardly, we should be a little bit more proactive and in designing experiments to sort of test some of these questions or hypotheses. So a major barrier that we've identified to this is our funding structures. So we have great reactive funding. The RAPID program through NSF is probably the one that everyone's familiar with. And those are designed to fund individual researchers that have an event happening at their location. But they tend to produce these My System, My Storm one-off stories. So we need mechanisms to allow us to plan for coordinated experiments to advance hurricane science. And so in this paper, in Frontiers, we proposed as an example, leveraging natural gradients and disturbance frequency, because we know that these events are going to happen. We don't know precisely when they're going to happen, but we do know that they are going to happen. And we know that they are more likely or more frequently happening at some places than others. So this is a map of hurricane frequency along the Gulf Coast and East Coast of the United States. The red areas are the highest frequency areas where there's pretty much a storm at least once every 5 years. And you can see that these are interspersed with much lower probability areas. And so using a gradient like this, or using similar approaches for other kinds of disturbances, which have higher and lower risk areas, you could leverage this to design observational experiments. So in the case of the hurricanes, one of the problems that we identified is that yes, you could do this, but you probably need something more like a decade rather than 5 years to ensure that you're going to get a good hit at one of your places. And at this point in time, federal funding sources don't operate on those time horizons. So that's one issue. And then the other issue is that, there is inherent risk with this approach because storms, they may not cooperate. They may not occur as expected. And so you are rolling the dice a little bit when you try something like this. However, we think that this is a pretty fruitful area that somebody should try to pursue. And at this point, we have not initiated any kind of network scale coordinated experiment leveraging the gradient like this. The other option is synthesis of existing data. This data set here was pulled together from our first sort of call for data. And we actually got quite a bit more data than what I'm showing here, but this was the data that we kind of fit the bill in terms of advancing into analyses. The figure on the left shows the 26 storm tracks from the storms for which we have data and the locations that they came from. In general, this is a 1986 to 2018 time period. There's over 4,000 time series that are included in this set of analyses. And again, 26 different storms, primarily in the Southeast United States, although we did accept one interesting series from Taiwan that was comparable in a lot of ways to data sets collected at Lukio. These data came from a variety of different systems. So lots of estuarine water quote data, so embayment type data, but a variety of other systems. So freshwater systems, dunes, mangrove forests, inland terrestrial forests. Because we had some really sort of minor categories, we lumped these down into looking at freshwater versus saltwater, terrestrial systems, and wetland systems. And in terms of response variables, we had 151 unique response variables in the data set. And again, we had to simplify this down to some categories of response. So biogeochemistry, hydrography, mobile biota, sedentary fauna, and vascular plants. And you can see that the biggest chunk of the pie here, again, is it's biogeochemistry and hydrographic variables, because it's easy to get data sondes out there and collect time series data. And so that's the most frequently collected information. So with all this data, the next challenge is, well, we have to standardize it. So this is a hypothetical time series. We have our ecosystem measurement versus time, and we've got our baseline period before an event, and then we have our event occurring. And so we really focus on two aspects of this. So the effect size, so how big of a disturbance was there, how big of a response is there, and then how long does it take for things to get back to normal? And these things are pretty easy to measure quantitatively. But when you start getting into comparative work, you can't stop there. So in the case of the effect size, we initially were calculating this as a log response ratio, which I imagine most of you are familiar with. But we thought about it and we realized that these effects need to be scaled for the disturbance magnitude. It's not really fair to directly compare effects across systems that are being impacted by storms of different magnitudes in terms of wind speed or flooding or whatever the stressor is. Similarly, the return time is always going to be longer if the effect size was bigger. And so again, for comparative purposes, this has to be scaled by the effect size, and a rate needs to be considered. So this framework here is what we ended up settling on for the right way to look at these responses. And so, we've got our unmeasured intrinsic resistance and resilience from the concept diagram I showed before. And then we have observed resistance and resilience as calculated by these equations denoted here. And these things are sort of indicators of the stressor magnitude interacting with resistance, intrinsic resistance, and the maximum change interacting with intrinsic resilience to denote turn time. So putting all this together for all these different time series, we observed a number of interesting things in the data set. But one big one is that this figure here shows across the different systems in response to different stressors and different response types. So a lot of different things in this figure. We observed variation in response magnitudes to wind speed, maximum rainfall, total rainfall among ecosystem categories and response types. So there's quite a lot of variation in how systems and response variables respond to different stressors. I don't want to go into all of this because we could spend an hour just looking at this figure and kind of talking about it. But some of the things that jumped out were, for example, there was a really clear split in how aquatic versus terrestrial systems respond to wind and rain stress in terms of biochemistry. So we have a lot more sensitivity in the aquatic systems than in the terrestrial systems. Another pretty obvious split in hindsight is, in vascular plant responses, it's a big difference in how submersed versus exposed or terrestrial communities respond to these disturbances. They really split out very neatly, as you can see here. So lots of variations present in the data set and little stories that we can tell about what might be going on there. But when we kind of look at all the data in aggregate, one of the things that jumped out at us is that there's this very, very consistent pattern of negative covariance between our calculations of resistance and our calculations of resilience. In fact, it was so tight and consistent that we were worried that this was some kind of artifact of the analysis, that it wasn't real. We spent quite a bit of time running simulations and various checks to make sure that this wasn't just being produced, tautologically. But we convinced ourselves that this is a real pattern that's present in the data. We also see this repeated within some systems where we have enough data to look at it. So, for example, resistance is going up across these categories in freshwater systems, and while resilience is going down, and we see a similar pattern in wetlands. So we do see this in some of our chunks of the data where we have enough observations to make these comparisons. So what is going on? Well, we think that evolutionary theory is the best explanation for this. It's hard to be good at everything. We have K versus R selected species. There's the competition versus colonization trade-off. So there's lots of examples of this organisms sort of focusing on one set of life history strategies or another. And so basically, we think that organisms are trending towards being either more resilient or more resistant and not being both at the same time. So that would explain floral and faunal responses. So again, and you can kind of look at something like this forest succession, like the difference between fast early colonizers versus climax species. There's a lot of differences in the life history of those kinds of taxa. And this has been seen actually in some of the earlier hurricane literature. So this paper from Bellingham 1995 Ecology was looking at trees in Jamaica. They didn't use the same terms, but they do see this similar pattern of covariation between the resistance and the resilience of the tree species that they're looking at. This is not hurricane work. This was lots of mesocosm work, but Hillebrand et al. 2018 Ecology Letters observed really strong covariance between resistance and resilience in these small scale disturbances. And this was theorized and observed in some of the early kind of theoretical literature of the 1970s. So I think it's a real thing. And it's pretty interesting. But then it also begs the question, well, why would the biogeochemical responses follow a similar pattern? And we think that the old biodiversity ecosystem function sort of relationship is probably the best explanation for that. If you're looking at processes that or responses that are indicative of processes which are dependent on biota, they should follow a somewhat similar relationship of negative covariation as the biota themselves. And the exception to that would be if you've got really strong functional redundancy and complementarity, you could potentially decouple or break that pattern. So the take-home points of this analysis are, this general pattern, we think this could be just a general law in ecology. It seems to operate not just in storms, in lab experiments, lots of different taxa. So this is probably a pretty general thing. And again, we think that this is explained by this fact that organisms tend to prioritize selection in one direction or another and seldom in both. One of the interesting take-home points for management of coastal systems is that this means that you might not be able to manage for both resistance and resilience, at least not at relatively fine scales. And it's something that you'll hear the management community talk about quite a bit, how we need to enhance the resistance and the resilience of coastal systems to these kinds of disturbances. And it may not be possible. It may be that each location, you need to make a choice about whether you're going to be managing for resistance or managing for resilience. The other thing that this initial stab revealed is that there's a lot of holes in the data set. We didn't have as much data on real processes, mobile fauna, and also terrestrial responses. There just isn't as much data on those things. But even so, within the data sets that we have, we've really kind of just scratched the surface. So that work is in print. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the new stuff that's been going on. So this is a brief presentation of some work that's coming out of our second working group on eco, evo, and biodiversity. So these are all the different folks that were involved with this effort. And there's two different teams that sort of emerged from this. So the big question that folks focused on was this biodiversity and how it enhances community stability. So we know that this does happen in terrestrial systems. There's a lot of good work on this and also other freshwater systems. And so as our coastal ecosystem stressors are intensifying, nutrient pollution, habitat change, heat waves, and of course hurricanes, begs the question, does the biodiversity of the coastal system somewhat ameliorate or buffer the impacts of extreme disturbances? So how much does local biodiversity moderate system response? And we identified coastal fish communities as a good model community to look at because, well, I'm going to jump to the most important part. They're highly monitored. There's a lot of data on these, and it's collected in similar ways. And they're diverse, and we've got variation in composition and diversity and history. So there's a lot of things that we can sort of examine within coastal fishes. But I think most importantly, there's a lot of data out there. And so we put together a data set of 40 unique trawl survey areas that had monthly growing season data. And the data sets range from between 1979 and 2019. And within this monitoring period and set of locations, there's dozens of storms that impacted the bays. And at each one of these bays where we have data, there's an average of about 20 years of data. And this covers 400 different fish species, replicated surveys using similar methods. And for all of these, we calculated the biomass, the abundance of species and whole communities, and also calculated various measures of biodiversity, richness, functional diversity, and then finally, we could match all this up with storms and storm metrics like wind speed, rainfall, energy delivered. And a lot of this work was spearheaded by a postdoc in my group at the time, Annie Hensel, who's now a postdoc with Laura Reynolds at the University of Florida. Oh, and of course, responses. So how did the communities respond to these events? So big question, does biodiversity increase community resilience across hurricane intensity? What are some of these general relationships between intensity, diversity, and the resistance and resilience of fish communities? And then are there trends? Because we've got a lot of time covered here. Are there trends in fish communities that might be changing the resilience of the communities? Some of the big results I'm just going to briefly show here are, we have identified what appear to be positive relationships between trawl level richness and resilience, and also storm frequency. So sites that tend to get hit more frequently by storms tend to show higher resilience than sites that are less frequently hit by storms. We also see some similar patterns in resistance, where richness tends to enhance the resistance to wind and rain effects. So for the most part, largely matching up with what we expected. So nice to see. Kind of putting this together in more of a path analysis or structural equation type framework. It looks like perhaps what's going on is that storm frequency is constraining site diversity. So it's affecting site diversity, and site diversity is then impacting how the communities respond in terms of their resistance and their resilience to these disturbance events. Some other things that we've noted are that there's particular groups of taxa that tend to be the resilient taxa. So in particular, the cyanids, so things like drum and croaker tend to be more resilient than the other species in these groups. And then another effort that's sort of spun off from this is being led by Rolando Santos and Ryan James at FIU. They've been looking at the functional diversity and trait space of these communities before and after storms. So this plot here shows the convex hull predicted trait diversity in these different ecoregions before and after storms. And one of the interesting things that they've highlighted in their work is that it appears that functional diversity in communities increases in the wake of storm events. So you get a lot of other species sort of stepping up and enhancing the trait volume post disturbance, which mechanistically that sort of jives with the whole idea of a more diverse system has greater capacity to respond to disturbance because other species can sort of step up and take over some of the functions that may have been lost by species that were sort of knocked down by the event. So, these data together show one, we think to get some pretty good evidence for diversity enhancing community recovery. Hurricane frequency does seem to be having an effect on these responses. And there's clear evidence of the identity of the organisms themselves being an important part of this. So some of the implications of this are that, one, it does look like across our data that we're seeing increases in adaptation to increasing storm frequency. So that's good. That suggests that the systems are getting better at responding to storms as storms become more frequent with climate change. But by identifying some of the sort of mechanisms at play here, perhaps fisheries managers could work to further enhance resilience to hurricanes by setting stock targets for different suites of species. So enhancing diversity or robust populations of resilient taxa groups that are known to maintain functioning after storms. And so I'm going to put a little plug in. You want to hear more about this? Today at 3:30 Eastern time, the HERS network is having a seminar that Annie is giving on the same topic. So she's going to be presenting the same stuff, but in greater detail. And then she actually did all the analyses, so you can ask her more detailed questions. And I'm going to pop the Zoom link for that in the chat because I don't think anyone's going to get it off of this this brief slide. So then the last thing that we've been sort of jumping into lately is looking at feedbacks between the natural and socioeconomic systems. And I don't have a lot to present here yet. We did have a workshop that FIU's DC office hosted. So we had this workshop back in May. We had a great mix of sociologists, economists, and ecologists brainstorming. And we did a lot of brainstorming. We did a lot of sticky notes. We did a lot of arguing. We arrived at the conclusion that this is tough. It's really hard to bridge social sciences and natural sciences, which anyone who's done this before is going to say, no, no, duh. Of course it's hard. But it was shocking to some of us just how tough it is to sort of bridge these fields and make advancement. But we came up with some good ideas. And there's 3 different spin-offs that are in the works. And so one of them is just focusing on like what are the important indicators of socioeconomic resilience that we can work with and pair with ecological data. There's a more sort of quantitative effort that's emerging to take those data I shared before, fisheries, independent monitoring data sets, and see if we can pair those with indicators of fisheries themselves or related socioeconomic factors, and see whether there's covariation between the resistance resilience of the ecosystems, natural populations, and these coastal communities. So that's a project that's kind of gearing up right now. And then the third one is this is actually one that John Kamenowski is leading. Is more of like a framework for thinking about coastal hazards. So these are the 3 sort of nexuses that emerged from this workshop that we're going to be pushing forward on. And just to give an example of this idea about the fisheries feedbacks, this was part of like the concept model. You know, we were wondering about how the storm pre-storm fishing pressure can exert top-down patterns on marine systems, and how a storm might, by reducing fishing pressure, might change trophic dynamics or enhance fisheries, allow them to recover more quickly. And this could go working in opposite directions where perhaps, you know, robust fisheries can enhance recovery of the social system. So there's a number of different ways these kinds of interactions could play out. All right, so I've gone 40 minutes now. I'm going to close by saying, one, we're in the later days of the network, but we're not done. We're thinking about having another synthesis network meeting to get more. We have a lot more data now, so maybe going back and revisiting the Science Advances paper, but asking some new questions with bigger data. So we want folks to still get involved. You can sign up for the listserv, get info about upcoming webinars, workshops, papers that are coming out. We're still accepting data if you've got relevant data to share. And of course, we have our seminar series that our first one is today, but we've got another planned for October on related synthesis effort with hurricane data that Colette Pion is giving, and then more work directly from HERS in November. And then we'll be taking a break with additional seminars gearing up in late January. So my final thoughts are: 1, climate change, it's happening now. And we're changing everything. So the baseline conditions, structure and function of ecosystems are changing right now. And that means that the resistance and resilience of these systems to perturbations is also changing right now. At the same time, frequency and magnitude of extreme events, all extreme events, is changing. Focus here is tropical cyclones, but this also applies to fires and other things. And so with all of this change in both the systems and the stressors, we need to do a better job of mechanistically understanding what are like the general rules at play in governing system response and governing resistance and resilience to stressors like this, because that is what is going to be required to make predictions under different scenarios about how systems are going to be affected by extreme events in the future. So lots of people have contributed to this effort. I probably don't even have everyone up here that has contributed, and be happy to take questions. So thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Chris. That was terrific. I would welcome everybody who's on the call to just turn on your video and we can have actually see each other for a Q&A. That'd be nice. I have sort of bigger picture questions about how this work relates to other sorts of disturbance impacts, like fire and drought, and whether you're starting to think along those lines at all. But maybe we can start with folks who have sort of more focused questions.
I can't figure out how to raise my hand right at the moment, but Al Pluterman, work at Woodsole Oceanographic, and we my question, I guess, is a simple one. How far offshore are you interested in going, like continental shelf, or is it really estuarine and, you know, within a mile of the coastline?
Well, we are open to looking at everything within the network, but the kinds of people that have gotten active and involved with the network and the kinds of data that's been submitted has been primarily coastal zone. So we have very little offshore data. There's been some, so like offshore surveys of ichthyoplankton and things of that nature, but not much. Usually we're talking about stuff that's happening either in the estuaries, right on the coast, or within a few miles inland. That seems to be where people are kind of focusing.
Okay, good. So if it's a more data restricted than anything else, we might be able to help. I'm part of the Ocean Observatories Initiative, and there's an array, interdisciplinary array. It won't have all the variables you want, but it'll have some just north of Cape Hatteras that's been installed just April of this year. So I'll send you a little info on it, or the website link or something, and it might be useful. It might be at least a different, yet another ecosystem type for your matrix.
Yeah, no, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Terrific. Oh, thanks for the Zoom link, Chris. And then, so West Coast focused, have you started to work with folks at like, yeah, on the West Coast at all?
Yeah, this is another like, I'm not sure why, but we have not gotten a lot of engagement from West Coast folks. I mean, I think that part of this might be like, since it's a quote hurricane network, maybe even the name was a problematic from the get-go. So we do have a few people from the West Coast that have been somewhat active with the network, giving presentations or participating, but they all work on the East Coast. So like people on the West Coast that are working in like Puerto Rico or in the Caribbean. So yeah, not a lot of actually like West Coast data coming in. And so that's another deficiency. And we had originally planned to try to get more international with the network, and not a lot of engagement. So like definitely folks from the Caribbean, but not like Southeast Asia. Like we haven't really gotten a lot of a sort of a buy-in out there, and that could just be like we haven't reached out in the right ways to engage with folks from that area of the world. So our biggest engagement has definitely been Southeast US, Gulf Coast, Caribbean. Like that seems where most of the people that are engaging are coming from.
I know there's an effort afoot amongst the international LTER network to build a stronger Americas coalition, particularly around water quality. So that might be a nice fit for at least the socioeconomic piece of it.
Yeah, okay. If you any of these helpful suggestions, yeah, please feel free to email me. In fact, I'll put my email in the chat also.
Great. Any other questions for Chris? All right. Well, thank you so much. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel, the LTR Network YouTube channel, and also as a link from the event itself within a couple of days. So hopefully we'll catch people who weren't able to make this time, but I really appreciate your time.
I appreciate being invited. This was great. Can I ask a question of the network?
Sure.
The four of you that are here. So I'm curious, have there been within the LTER network? I mean, I know that John Kamenowski would be up on this, but have there been any discussions of trying to do any sort of cross-site sort of synthesis or experimentation to look at these kind of extreme events? It doesn't even have to be tropical cyclones aside. The LTER network covers so many different biomes and locations. Does it tend to be fairly siloed from site to site, or is there?
No, there's been so there have been a number of efforts over the years to synthesize around disturbance and develop a framework for disturbance ecology. The most recent, I think, was a Geyser et al. Paper. I can dig it up for you. That built on the Scott Collins ISSE framework around disturbance generally, and in addition to those sort of site-initiated syntheses, we also fund synthesis efforts through the network office. So that's definitely something to consider, especially as your NSF funding winds down. So those are typically 2-year projects funded for 3 or 4 working group meetings, along with analytical support, focused around the emphasis is on core areas, LTER core areas, which includes disturbance. So that's primary production populations, carbon cycling, nitrogen, nutrient cycling, disturbance, and human interactions. So total fit on that front. I definitely consider that as a possibility. We just announced the funding for this year. 2025 will be short working groups, so just 1 meeting, but 2026 will be the full 2-year working groups again.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so lots of opportunities for data synthesis.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you thought about the ultra data call? That would be another one that
No, at this exact moment, I'm really focused on just digesting what we're doing rather than trying to chase more money. I think we did a lot of rapid expansion. And I'll say that not just the network, but I moved right at the time this got funded. So I moved from Texas to VIMS. And then I had a couple NSF grants all get funded at the same time. So I personally have been just like kind of overloaded. But we're trying to wind things down, get some products out, and then really start focusing on like what's next for the future.
Yeah, I'd be interested too to think about, and we talked about this a little early on, was the intersection of the network has a couple of artificial hurricane experiments. So the sort of relationship between that and the natural experiments would be interesting.
Yeah.
Keogh has one, Harvard Forest has one. Bill should be clued into those.
Yeah, there's some like canopy removal work that was done in Blue Keogh.
But at Harvard Forest, it was actually a full pull down.
Oh, it was a full pull down. Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of a crazy experiment. Yeah. Anyway, good to have you.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks again, everybody. It was nice. It's nice to meet those of you I haven't seen before, and yeah, I'll keep an eye out for future webinars.
Great. Thanks, Al. Thanks, Mike. Take care.
Cheers.